Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to another episode of the Nishant Garg Show. The mission of the show is to spread mindfulness awareness, and my job on the show is to invite world-class performers to share the practices, routines, and habits to live a fulfilled life. Today's guest is Dr. Alexei Vranich. Dr. Alexei is an archaeologist and public speaker. Alexei received his Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania. He has extensive research experience around the world in such places as Spain, Italy, India, Peru, Bulgaria, and Costa Rica. He has been recognized by the National Science Foundation for the innovation application of technology in the study of the past. Bridging the divide between academic and popular archaeology, Alexei has appeared in television and in magazines such as National Geographic, The Sciences, and Archaeology Magazine, in addition to a variety of national and international newspapers. Dr. Alexei teaches the biomechanics of breathing and a dynamic meditation for athletes, as well as correct breathing for presenters and public speaking. In this episode, Alexei discusses about dynamic meditation, biomechanics of breathing, Stoicism and Buddhism, perception and interpretation, mindfulness and happiness, how to study the past to create present. To know more, keep listening. Alexei, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Finally, we are here, and I'm super glad and excited to have this podcast recording with you.
Very well. No, it's an opportune time. We live in strange days, so we have to all sort of compare notes a bit as to how we're going about constructing our days and staying sane.
Indeed, we are living in a different world these days. And coming back to your experience, you have decades of experience in archaeology, meditation, breathing exercises, and, a lot more on training athletes on the performance side. I would like to ask you, how does your family describe now what you do for a living?
How does my family describe? Well, they stick with the archaeology because that's the most interesting part. And whenever you say I do archaeology, everyone has seen, the Indiana Jones films or Discovery Channel. If you say, oh, he's also helping people relax or athletes increase their performance with breathing, that sounds a little bit strange. So this aspect of my life related to breathing, training, and meditation is a bit hidden under the appeal and the glamour, or the supposed glamour, of archaeology.
I know our listeners can definitely Google what is archaeology, but what does an archaeologist do?
Well, what does an archaeologist do? Well, I'm a historian, except I'm looking at history with objects. So I have fragments of the past, and I try to create patterns and ascribe some sort of meaning to it. In a practical sense, that means that every summer, for 3 months, I go off into the field where we do some type of research, excavating, surveying, recording architecture. It can be a whole variety of different techniques, but usually 3 months the year I find myself now in Peru and Bolivia in the high Andes doing some type of work or another on a culture that was about maybe 500 to 1,000 years ago.
Usually in self-help and personal development, people say that we should not talk about past. We should only learn from the past. But why we study about the past in archaeology?
Well, it's first of all, it's the only way to understand most of what went on in the past. 99.999% of what happened in the past is not recorded. We have tales of kings and conquests and so on. And then even in this case, where we have a pre-literate culture, we don't have writing, nearly all that information is completely gone. So we do need to study the past to understand, not only for its own sake, to say, like, where did we come from, but we do have incidents where, if we are going to be making plans for the present and the future, it's a good idea to look at what people did there beforehand in case there's any inspiration or at least mistakes to avoid.
When you study human culture, behaviors in the past, does it help you in your personal life as well?
What it does, it really drives home for me the idea that we construct our own reality. And And every culture has a different way of interpreting and looking at their world based on their culture. So it's driven home for me that when I observe things and make conclusions, I'm really not perceiving reality. I'm just interpreting reality according to my own culture and my own experiences. So it drives home that bit. The other thing that it does is that for all the problems or challenges I might have at the present, you have to put it into a sort of a larger context. Everybody that I study, all my research is people that are no longer here. They have died. So our time on Earth is relatively short, and eventually we all go to the same place. This is a one-way trip. No one's coming back from this one alive. So you realize when you excavate a burial and you find a person, or you see a monument that was built with so much meaning, several centuries ago, now fallen over, that all meaning eventually loses meaning. So it keeps you a little bit humble and realizing we're just a brief moment in time.
You mentioned about perception and interpretation. Could you elaborate more on that concept? I'm very curious to learn on this.
Well, I mean, the idea of perception and interpretation, I do remember a time before I got more serious into this, believing that what I saw was real. And the fact that, this is the way the world is, and there's right and there's wrong. The more I looked at, both through archaeology, but through other readings between Buddhism, Stoicism, and so on, you realize we just simply create the world through our interpretation of the limited amount of information we get from our senses, from our eyes, our ears, and so on. And once that information hits our brain, we interpret it. And everybody has a slightly different interpretation. There's a couple of things like we will all agree with. That's a table, that's a building. But after that, how we construct its meaning, or whether it's good or it's bad, or whether we like it or we don't, that's all inside of our brain. So by changing our mind, we do change the way that we perceive our world. And that part's very flexible. In addition to that, I've just become more and more hesitant to rely on my memory, just because I realize that memory is very flexible and it depends on how you feel at the moment. And you will remember or re-remember or change around your memories to make a narrative to fit your present moment. So I've become very hesitant to remember something and think that's the way it was.
Do you apply Stoicism in your personal life?
Absolutely. Do I
I
apply
love that
Stoicism?
philosophy.
It's, I've several years ago, you hit an age where my friends, myself, I guess included, we get a case of SBS, which is sudden Buddha syndrome. And that happens to lots of people hitting their 40s or so and doing their work, and they sort of sit around and wonder, it's like, what the hey am I doing? Even successful people. So, yeah. And then all of a sudden people are saying like, oh, I'm Buddhist. And I'm like, no, dude, you went to like 2 yoga classes and you drink craft beer. That's not Buddhism. Plus you have, like a ton of money, 2 houses, a plane in Tahoe. It's like, you're not exactly giving anything up. You're just trying to chill out a little bit. But at that time I started reading a great deal of Buddhism, but then I switched over and continued to read into Stoicism. And some of the classic works by, Marcus Aurelius and other philosophers. And one of the things about it that appealed to me, especially as an archaeologist, you realize that people in the past had very similar issues to what we have right now. And before you go off thinking about what is it that, like, what am I doing? And this is horrible. I'm completely lost. This has been a feeling that everyone's had for the last few thousand years, and a lot of very smart people have written about it. So it's good to read up on their ideas because they've thought it out too. So before you think about doing this all by yourself and trying to come to your conclusions, read what other people have written, and it might actually help you. In the case of my favorite book, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, you realize a Roman emperor had the same things going on in his head as someone who's a coder in California or a teacher in Georgia. We still share similar aspects of the human condition when it comes to our search for a meaningful and purposeful life.
I love what you are saying, that we are not alone and we all go through the same things. And people in the past have gone through so many things, so we can read about them. And you are speaking of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations book. Have you read Letters of Seneca?
I have gone back and forth through the different philosophers, and what I've done is pick and choose. And the thing is that one can sit down with one of these books, with meditations, and read it to cover, and not really and agree with it, be revealed by it. But then, how do you go about changing your life? And what I've been doing is reading until I find a page that has something which is meaningful, then reading it several times and seeing how can I apply that to my life today, and
Would
see
you
when I go out into
mind
the street.
explaining any quote or any principle from Stoicism that you have applied and you still apply in your personal life or in
Well,
professional life?
there's one from Marcus Aurelius where he says, and of course I haven't memorized the quotes, but it's basically saying that today you will wake up and go out and you will find some mean people, some nasty people, some people that will say awful things to you, and that's what's going to happen. And you need to be, accepting that's going to happen. It probably has very little to do with you, and you need it to not affect you as you go along. You need not to react to it because there's a good chance it's their own suffering and nothing to do with you. But you're not going to have a day where you're not going to run into some type of conflict. How that conflict or how that interaction develops, it's up to you. And that's one of them that I take with me. That way I'm not surprised when somebody says something awful, or I run into someone, you go, it's like, this is expected. Now, what am I going to do about this? So that's one that I've applied to my life when I had a difficult distance travel from one country to another, and there was just a lot of mess going on. A lot of strange things happened on that trip, trying to get across from one border to another, and at no point did I take it personally, and it made the trip a lot better because I was simply patient, sitting back, and there were things well outside my control. And that was an example of taking one page from Marcus Aurelius and applying it at that point in my life. The next day, I tried to find, another quote or something else that I could see if I could specifically apply that one, because there's so much in there. You can read it all and then forget about it.
There's so much in that book, and those quotes are very powerful. If we really apply it, we can create our mental and emotional strength. And
It's
Buddhism says that, whatever people says, we can be kind, we can let go.
hmm Absolutely. And it's the thing about it is that you have to read it, think about it, then apply it. I think people think that if you scroll through Facebook and read enough memes, eventually you become a better person. These things are practices, and you have to take something and practice. Go out into the world and seeing, can I apply this? So you can't find peace by saying by yourself, meditating on your proverbial mountaintop. You actually have to go out into society and see, can I actually apply this?
Correct. Why did you choose to go from Buddhism to Stoicism?
I was reading both at the same time, and I just have to admit that there are aspects of Buddhism that I just find opaque, and some of it is just a little bit foreign to my upbringing. So this is my own Western bias. The Stoicism was simply something that I guess it was more relatable to my Western upbringing. So that's why it appealed to me and how I found it. But I continue to read both of them. I carry a copy of the Dhammapada with me in my backpack all the time, and every once in a while I'll read one or two pages of it and try to think about it. But the Stoicism, I mean, neither of them are. They're just practices, and they're quite similar. There are differences, but they're quite similar. So one of them simply appealed to me, and it could be just related to my upbringing and my own culture.
I I read mix of Buddhism and Stoicism. In terms of Buddhism, I would read Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, and then Letters of Seneca in Stoicism. I think Stoicism provides more practical principles that we can apply in our life, such as practicing the worst case scenario, rehearsing the worst case scenario, and if we can accept any worst case scenario, if visualizing about the worst case scenario, if we can accept that, then we can move forward in life. And practicing poverty, if we can practice eating rice and beans maybe in a week, then we don't scare of poverty from coming from Stoicism. And I would like to mention that you are my first guest in last 5 months who is talking about Stoicism. A lot of people talk about Buddhism, mindfulness. Nobody talks about Stoicism in the Western world, actually.
It's interesting that it's gone this way. That Stoicism was such a cornerstone of essentially a Western thought, and then since essentially the discovery of Buddhism a few decades ago, its relationship to yoga and psychedelics and so on, it has gone across the Western world, and I think there's a little bit more appeal to it, saying that you study Buddhism or I'm a Buddhist. Being a Stoic, it's definitely misunderstood.
Yes, dictionary meaning.
Perhaps it's being relegated a little bit to, that's sort of just Western, and Western is capitalist. It's the present condition of this world. So there might be a bias against that. Plus the catch saying that I'm Buddhist. I mean, you're sitting in a bar and somebody asks you, it's like, what are you? It's like, oh, I'm Buddhist. If you say something like, hey, I'm a Stoicist, then you think it's like, oh, you're like some sort of Spartan guy who will sit in the cold and accept it. There's misconceptions about it.
And the dictionary meaning of Stoicism is confusing. It's like there is no emotion. Emotionless.
Yeah, emotionless. So I guess our biggest introduction to Stoicism would be through Star Trek and Spock and Vulcans. And that's the idea that you have no emotions. And that's not the case, of course. So it's around. Stoicism continues to be read. And I just feel that given enough time, we'll go back and forth between different trends. And I encourage people to read different works on Buddhism, especially the ones that are more accessible to a Western mind. But also my copy of Meditations, I can't keep a copy of Meditations too long because eventually I give it to someone and then I have to order another copy. And invariably I have a conversation with the person telling me afterwards, like, this was wonderful, it's changed my life, and so on.
Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, right?
That's correct, yes.
Is there any other book that you have given so much as a gift?
The other one is, since we'll switch over to Buddhism, but there's so many aspects of Buddhism that are opaque and will always be opaque to everyone but the most serious scholar. So we have to be able to digest it in a way that is acceptable and comprehensible to our Western mind. So we've had a series of people in Buddhism that have been able to translate it to the Western mind, and especially these times, which are so uncertain. The one book that I've given away several times now has been through Pima and her book Comfortable with Uncertainty. And right now we are in certain times. There's a lot of people that have lost their jobs, unsure about their jobs. All their plans have been changed radically. And this is a book that allows you to sit down and go, it's like, okay, things are uncertain. By the way, they're more uncertain now. Before they were just as uncertain, but we had the illusion of permanence and stability. That book, I don't know how many times I've purchased and sent that book, but I found that one to be very accessible, especially when I'm at the university and speaking with students who invariably are all suffering from one level or another of the extreme pressures they have these days.
And since we are talking about meditations, I would like to ask you, do you have a real meditation practice in your life?
Oh, absolutely. About a real meditation practice, it's something that I tell people you have to. You have to do this, especially with my students. By the way, one of the things that I've done for, it was an 8-year period, was living with students in the university dorms. So I was just the professor down the hallway, or either the really lucky guy who gets to be a freshman for 30 straight years down the hall, or the really strange, dangerous looking guy down the hall. So I was looked at in probably 2 different ways. I had a cat, so that drew a lot of people into the apartment. But I would tell students that, like, let's you need to meditate. And I'd hold weekly meditations in my room so they can sit down. And especially in these ages when you need to digitally detox at least for 20 minutes and slow the mind down. And that was an opportunity to shut off the phones, shut off the computers, and just sit down. And then for 20 minutes, see, can you actually do this? And not necessarily fall off into nirvana, but at least turn things off so that you're not being constantly bombarded with these sort of dopamine spikes that you get from looking at all this digital media and images and Instagram and so on. So I've applied that to this generation of students that are heavily criticized by older generations, but I know that they're under a tremendous amount of pressure and a lot of different challenges that no other generation has had.
A lot of younger generation is getting into meditation these days.
Yes, that's the idea that meditation is good, but it's always been good. But in particular for this generation, who can be constantly bombarded all day long with the connectivity of the internet, just one thing after another, and when they're not doing that, they're just simply scrolling through it. And some folks look at that and go, "It's like, God, I hate these kids that they do that. Don't they look up? Don't they appreciate these things?" They actually do want to. But it is an addiction. And, one of my things I do is take students down to South America as part of my archaeological research. And I put them on the research project, and we're there. So I'm living with students for 5 weeks down in Peru, 20 students up to 45 at one point. And I say, it's like, great, it's like, put your phone away. We're going out to dinner. If you want to check your phone during dinner, that's good. Just go eat dinner by yourself and you pay for it. And the students are not happy about that for the first day. The second day, they're still complaining. Third day, they're not. By the fourth day, they're liberated from the phone and they're happier. And they realize that it is an addiction. They've been able to break themselves from that. And they're able to slow their lifestyle and their mind down a little bit. And by the end of the season, I remember once we were in a restaurant and we were just laughing and having a good time. And I told the students, go, look around. And we looked at every other table with families, with tour groups, and so on. Every other table was quiet because everyone was looking at the phone. We were the only ones that were talking among ourselves and having a good time. So when going back to the idea of meditation and why they're doing that, well, it's an ability, it's a chance to break away from this fast-paced world that overwhelms our mind and just keeps us on these like little dopamine spikes of images and scrolling through it and not having a chance to just sort of sit back, look at the world as it is, and slow down a bit.
How do you influence people to meditate, and when they go through so many challenges? I'm sure a lot of people go through challenges when they're starting meditation. How would you influence, or how would you inspire somebody to stick to the meditation practice for a long time?
Well, how would I inspire people to stay with meditation? Well, people have to come to you to meditate. You can't force this. I do know that, remember, during the mindfulness revolution, different corporate groups and so on were having their meditation sessions, probably mandatory. But unless somebody is interested and willing to do it, you really can't convince them. And the one thing you do is through example. For some reason, people look at me and think I'm calm. They don't know the sea of troubles that is going through my mind, just like everyone else. But they look at me, they're like, "Oh, wow, you're calm. Like, how do you do that?" So the only thing I can do is by example. And when I was living in the dormitories with the students, I'd say every week at this time we're having it. And students would say, like, "Oh, I'm sorry I missed it." I'm like, "It doesn't matter. Every week at this time I have it." So eventually somebody will make it. They'll come by and give it a shot. And I tell them that this is actually quite difficult. And I'll take them through a few steps to try to jumpstart it. And that's where I throw in the breathing aspect to sort of jumpstart their mind into a meditation practice, or at least try it for the first time.
Are you saying combining breathing practice with meditation, or they are separate practices?
The idea, one of the things that's difficult with meditation is that you take someone who is, been at the computer, hunched over, eyes on the screen, hands down on the keyboard, going at it for several hours.
That's me.
That's where we are. We're essentially in almost a predator style position of light breathing through our shoulders, arms in front of us into a cramped position, eyes staring. We look essentially like a jaguar looking at something it's about to hunt. And then you take that person and say, okay, now sit straight, flip your hands over the other way, close your eyes, now meditate. Of course, they're not going to meditate. They're just going to sit there for 20 minutes in their same mindset that they've just been sitting for the last 12 hours at the computer. So what I do with them is I say, let's do a little trick when it comes to breathing, because there's a direct relationship between breathing and emotion. You can ask them, it's like, how do you breathe when you're happy? How do you breathe when you're stressed? How do you breathe when you're relaxed? And then you say, it's like, okay, let's trick our mind. Let's breathe in a couple of different ways to trick our mind into breaking that cycle that we're in of overthinking or over-focusing on something in a computer, and see, can we actually relax our mind, tell our body that everything's fine, maybe even trick it through hypoventilation, for example, and just get a little bit high on oxygen, and then go into the meditation part. And the idea is to break with the normal high-stress world that they live in, start that, and once you're sitting down and actually feeling a little bit better, a little bit more relaxed from the breathing exercises, then we go into meditation. And that's a better way to introduce people into that and break with the rest of their life. And invariably, that's what meditation is. Can we break some of those dangerous mental loops that we have that we're not even aware of, and just do that for 20 minutes and allow us to go back to our work feeling refreshed.
As part of your breathing work, you talk about different kinds of breathing, different kinds of breathing practices for athletes, and the biomechanics of breathing. Could you explain more on these practices, please?
I mean, when you say you do breathing, a lot of folks are going to be like, oh yeah, Wim Hof, or perhaps there's that would be probably it. People would say that. I go, what are they? I go, listen, I've actually taken a course with this brother, nice people, great things. They just do something different than what I do. I'm a bit more of a scientist. I'm also an athlete, not very good. I enjoy being an athlete and not being very good at it. But I do athletics, I do martial arts. And to me, I look at breathing as just the mechanics of how we breathe. And the majority of us breathe quite poorly. And that starts off early in life because our body mechanics were designed, several 100,000 years ago, if not more. And now we live in a very sedentary, hunched over style, which has affected the way we breathe. And after a while, we start to use the muscles differently. So I say, listen, you have about 36 different muscles that you use for breathing. There's also a relationship to posture and how you can breathe. All I'm going to do is teach you how you used to breathe before you started sitting 12 to 14 hours a day on a chair and staring at a computer or doing any other type of office work. So it's like any other training, push-ups, chin-ups, doing aerobics. I'm going to say, with breathing, let's go over the basic mechanics of how you should breathe, and then let's do things to strengthen those muscles so that it becomes once again second nature, proper breathing. And once you do that, you'll just be getting in the proper amount of oxygen, having the proper exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, and also being able to choose what type of emotion you want during a given day. Do you want to feel hyper? Do you want to all right, guys, it's time to work. Let's ramp it up. Or you're like, oh my God, my mind is just full of 1,000 things. I have to slow down. And with this type of technique, you can understand the different muscles and the different mechanics of breathing and choose how you're going to feel.
Is there any correct way of breathing?
Is there any correct way of breathing? Well, I can tell you how mechanically we're designed to breathe. And this is how we should be breathing if we were, going about our lives in a very biomechanically congruent way. So my answer would be yes, there is. Within that, I can say it's like, well, now there's different times that you want to be doing certain things, either running away from danger or, you have a perceived danger, but you don't want it to affect your mind. You want to keep emotionally calm so you can make decisions. So the answer is yes, there is a proper way. And then the context changes where we can choose how we're breathing depending on what type of reaction we'd like to have.
Then why we have different breathing exercises for public speakers, presenters, and for athletes? What happens, let's say, if I'm going to present any topic on a stage, on a big stage, and there is anxiety, automatic anxiety there, before that. So how can we overcome that?
I work with both athletes that would like to increase their performance, who would like to reduce their anxiety before going into a contest, and also in the case of martial arts, if they're competing, how to go about not losing your emotions and maintaining yourself calm, because that's when you can no longer think about all that training you did and you go into a default mode, which probably doesn't relate to any of your training, just survival. The same thing happens when it comes with public speakers, and we begin to get nervous and anxious, and that's our body interpreting danger, and that's fine if we're in danger. If it's 200,000 years ago and we're in the savannah of Africa and we're being chased by a lion, you want your breathing to get faster. You need to get that energy into your muscles, and you need to run. If you're public speaking, your body is interpreting danger and it's putting you in a position where you need to run. You don't want that. Your mouth's going to get dry, your hands are going to get numb, your face is going to get numb, and you're going to start forgetting everything else that you're about to say. So in that case, it's like, okay, my body's reacting this way because evolutionarily speaking, we're designed. How can I go about calming myself down and tricking my body into basically understanding everything's okay? And in that case, we can do a series of breathing exercises where we essentially tell the body we're okay. We reduce the rate of the breath. We increase carbon dioxide going into our lungs, and all these things to trick the nervous system into thinking it's like, oh, everything's fine. And if we can do that regularly, then before you get up for the meeting, sure, you'll feel a little bit of anticipation and so on, but you won't fall into a paralyzing fear that hits some public speakers, or at least it'll help you not to.
Let's say when you go for any important meeting or for any important presentation, do you have a set of practices right before that?
Oh, yes. And so I have some practice. If I'm going to go lecture, and if I'm lecturing in some place that has nice weather, I'll go sit outside. And there's two things that I want to do when you lecture. You don't want to be too hyper. At the same time, if I meditate for an hour and go to lecture, I will just put everyone else to sleep because I will be also a little bit too calm. And I'll combine the breathing. I'll actually do some very fast breathing. Fire breath would be called in yoga. Exhale pulsations in this more biomechanical way that I teach breathing. And that's what I'm doing there is increasing oxygen and preparing the body essentially for a fight, getting a lot of oxygen into my body. So once I have increased the oxygen in my body, all the muscles are ready to go, then I stop and I switch over to a very controlled, slow breath with long exhales. And that drops down my mental state to a state of calm. And I'll do that until I feel absolutely calm. But at the same time, my body is completely fed and ready to go. So I'll do that a few times, and then I'll go into the lecture. And I find my body is calm. My mind is calm, but my body is ready to go.
This is amazing. So you're saying that meditation before any important meeting or lecture could be very calming. So breathing is something better than meditation, depending on the situation?
It's a combination. By the time I'm doing the very slow breathing, you would be hard pressed if you're looking at me to understand, am I breathing or am I meditating? And the answer is, well, I'm meditating on my breath, and I'm calming myself. I'm calming my mind down. My body is ready and completely happy to go. So that's a technique that I use, and it's gotten me results. People are constantly telling me I'm a great lecturer. It's like, how do you remember all these things? And of course, they assume it's like, oh my God, you're so natural at this. I'm like, no, I prepared the lecture for a very long time. I went over the slides, and then I mentally prepared myself beforehand to lecture. There's an assumption that if I do something well, it must be natural. So,
Could you please recommend any resources on the internet where our listeners can go and understand and learn more about the breath work?
well, this would be related more to what my sister, Dr. Alexei Vranich, has developed, and she has her webpage with all the resources on this type of breathing, which is distinct from other types. It's also, other types are quite legitimate, but if they go to thebreathingclass.com, they can see the work that she's done. There's a variety of other resources there, and there's her more recent publication, Breathing for Warriors, which is a book geared towards people that would like to use breathing when it comes to performance. And when I say performance, that goes everything from a UFC fighter to someone playing golf, all depending on what type of mental state do you want to be in before you do any type of activity.
I have listened to Dr. Belisa, and her work is up to the point, to the mark. Her new book came, Breathing for Warriors, and I will put all the links in the show notes for sure.
Yes, it's an important book. Before that, there's another book that she's put out, and it covers just the basic aspects. I would advise anyone to take a look at that, where it can go over the postures, but also it allows you to visualize breathing. People ask me, they go, it's like, why are you teaching something that everybody does without anyone teaching them to do it? I go, no, it's like, yes, we all breathe, but we also all walk. How many people have biomechanically a good stride? You can look at everyone, it's like, wow, that person needs orthotics. That person needs to swing their arms. That person's hunched over. When it comes to breathing, when you tell somebody, it's like, you're doing it wrong, you need to use their diaphragm. You're like, what? I'm breathing wrong? And where's my diaphragm? How do you use your diaphragm? I go, here's, like anything else, we're going to have to be very conscious about how we use these 36 or so different muscles. And then eventually it will become an unconscious act of breathing. But we have to be able to visualize it. So when I tell you, it's like, we're going to breathe through your back, you're like, what the hey? How can I breathe through my back? I go, it takes a bit to say, it's like, no, this muscle. It's almost like learning to walk again after a traumatic injury. And we have had, since the age of 5, our breathing has been traumatized by modern society, forcing us to sit. So here we have to reteach you how to breathe. But because some of these muscles are deep and we don't really know where they are, you need to visualize. And through the book and through the videos, you can start seeing, it's like, okay, that's my ribs, that's my back. Those are these muscles, that's the diaphragm. And you can learn how to use that. And it won't immediately change the way you breathe. It will take some time, but there are situations where you go, it's like, okay, I need to calm down. Let me engage these muscles. And you can visualize it and do that.
Have you practiced breathing through your heart?
Breathing through my heart?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to tell you no. That it's just a whole other different form of visualizing it. I don't go into sort of this. I imagine what you're asking. I don't go into that much into the spiritual aspect or the more yoga aspect of breathing. And to me, I'm looking at muscles and bone structure that serves as a container to pull air in and out. While some aspects of my life can be rather spiritual, when it comes to breathing, I'm looking at it as a machine.
From the biological perspective, I was
Very
talking
much.
to CEO of HeartMath Institute, Dr. Deborah Rosman, and she talks about coherence techniques, where how to open our heart, how to understand intuitive and heart intelligence through breathing, focusing on our heart, breathing through heart.
Yes. Well, and when a lot of these questions come up from, saying the yoga aspects of breathing to things just like Wim Hof, and I make it very clear that breathing is a multifaceted phenomena, and I concentrate on one phenomena, one facet of it. There are other ways to visualize it, and I recommend people to try these different ones and see which is the one that works for you best when it comes to visualizing and having proper breath. If this isn't working for you, you're like, you know what, I'm this mechanic stuff, it's too simply mechanical. I'd like to have something else where I can explore myself in a more spiritual way. Well, pranayama and perhaps this other type of breathing would be more appropriate for you. So you need to find, which one you're comfortable with.
And as in, there are many ways of meditation, loving meditation, metta meditation. There are many kinds of meditation. And in the same way, we have many forms, many phenomena of breathing. Whatever works for you, we should do that.
It's also the meditation. There's, if you go to a meditation class, or if you start going to meditation classes, you're probably not going to run into the same technique or the same format from one studio to another. And you have to find something that appeals to you. There's, I've been to some classes, and quite frankly, I will lose my mind if somebody else asks me to visualize a blue light coming from the sky into my third eye. I'm just not that person. When I do the meditation, I simply tell people, just concentrate on your breath. If you exhale longer than you inhale for 20 minutes, you will calm down. That's just simply a biomechanical reaction to it. And I keep it at that level. For some people, that appeals to them. Other folks would like to get into the more spiritual or religious or ritual aspects of it.
When I was doing some research on your profile on the internet, I found that you worked at 13,000 feet and
Yeah.
you did breath work at high altitudes. Could you please explain some more on that?
You know what? I worked up at, good Lord, that was, yeah, and I still continue. Now I work down at 11,000 feet, and just the place is, a lot more oxygen at that level. Everyone else is dying, but I've been up to 14,000 feet. And this was actually before my sister started developing this technique, before I was that serious about the relationship between breath, mind, and body. And I simply arrived at that altitude and I go, this is difficult. And one of the first things I did there, when they say like, all right, Alexei, get the equipment up to the top room, I had a sandwich in my hand. So I'm eating a sandwich and carrying a suitcase up these stairs at 13,000 feet. And I had to spit the sandwich out because I just could not get enough oxygen into my body. And I quickly realized that if you're not thinking about your breath at that altitude, you will choke yourself. You will find yourself out of breath. But even worse, as the day goes on, you've been starving your body and your mind of oxygen, and it dulls your mind. And I'm up there to research, and I need to stay sharp. So before even anyone was teaching me about breathing or the other aspects of it, I realized that I need to be thinking about my breath in, breath out, breath in, breath out. Am I going up steps? It's like, well, be sure that you're not eating something as you go along. It's like, do you need to run? It's like, well, there's only so far you're going to go. So at that altitude, after working there for 10 years, I simply had a survival technique to how to make sure that I was getting enough oxygen into my body so that I could get through the entire day and have a sharp mind. So that was essentially me breathing before even getting into breathing.
That
When
is
this started
amazing.
up, and I'm like, oh wait, this is what I've been doing, not well. I definitely needed a lot of help when it came to visualizing and other aspects of it. But I'd been doing it for a while and allowed me to survive at that altitude. Not survive, thrive, and
Thrive.
continue to do work. And breathing is directly related to health, being sure that you get enough oxygen into your body.
I would like to shift some gears here. You also talk about wellness programming, and in the wellness programming, you have multiple pillars such as mindfulness, promoting happiness, productivity. How can we be happy? This is what everybody wants to be happy in the world. How would you suggest somebody to be happy?
How to be happy. Oh, good Lord. I wish I had the complete answer for that.
Happiness.
More happiness. You know what? I have this conversation often, especially when I'm with students at the university. They do come up with basic questions about the class and so on. And especially when I was living in the dorms, they just sort of look at me and they look at me as somebody who is older, who's made decisions, who appears to be happy. So they'd like to be like, how'd you get to that point? Because right now they feel like they're unhappy and they're never going to reach a point of happiness. And you know, you can talk about the philosophy of happiness, of leading a mindful and meaningful life, of finding something that can give you meaning and feel like this life is worth living. You can go a little bit more Jordan Peterson on this all and talk about the value of struggle and fighting and how that's necessary. So I sort of break it down into a series of anecdotes and different stories on how one goes about making a decision to find a meaningful line of work. And that takes time talking to somebody. It's like, that's the first decision. And that's the hardest one, saying like, what do I want to do that makes me happy? Once you get that, the rest of it's easy. The first bit is the hard part. And then I talk about, well, if you want to, let's take a look at how you're living right now. And there can be a lot of very small, basic fixes that can help out your happiness. Just simply, I'll be talking to someone. It's like, well, how are you eating? How are you sleeping? How much do you drink? Do you have
Drink water.
do you drink enough water? Do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Are you dating? Are you trying to be, intimate with someone? Are you looking for that? Do you have friends? There's a lot of small little fixes, and I'll run across people that are just an absolute mess. It's like, I go to sleep about 3 or 4. I sleep till noon. No, I really didn't drink water yesterday. I did have 7 cups of coffee though. That's sort of like water. And, it'll go through and it's like, you know what, let's do this. And more than once when I've had somebody stressing out with me, it's like, great, put on your shoes. Let's go to the stadium. Let's go and run some steps. Or like, you know what, I have my boxing gear. Put these on. Let's go hit stuff for a while. And then afterwards I asked them, it's like, okay, those things that were bothering you, are they bothering you now? It's like, no, not really. I realized I was a little bit stressed. So there's a couple of small little steps in there. When it comes to talking about the greater aspects of the philosophy of happiness, it's fun to talk about, but often those types of lessons are great conversations, but difficult to apply in life. I have students come to me and they ask me, like, what are the specific steps I can do to lead a happier life and make a good decision? And this is where I get into the small aspects, like what I just mentioned. And that includes also the breathing and the meditation, especially when their mind spins out of control in a given day from being overwhelmed with too many sources of information.
And sometimes, or I would say most of the time, happiness is moment to moment.
Well, happiness is moment to moment. And then I tell people, it's like, this is meaningful now, but all meaning loses meaning. So it will be good for a bit. And then you can go to and then something will start to change, and that's not bad. This world's about change, and then you can go on to the next thing, or then you can change things up and go to the next thing. Most young people visualize it's like college, pre-med, med school, finish med school, be a doctor, happy. It's like, no, that's not the way the way the things go. By the way, you just sacrificed 15 years of your life to being unhappy, to supposedly being happy once you're a doctor. So each one of these stages, you have to figure out, well, what am I doing here to find this enjoyable? It doesn't mean that you're not going to be working hard and you're not going to be sitting there like, oh my God, my brain's about to break. I've been awake for 15 hours looking at this book. You will have moments like that, but you have to have a certain practice during the days and as you go about this that maintains your sanity. And of course, having a larger goal or a larger meaning definitely helps. How is easy once you know the why.
That is awesome. Why matters. And I think why keeps changing. It keeps evolving.
It unfortunately it does. And then you find yourself in a position where that meaning, that why, all of a sudden starts losing it. And that turns into, usually for a lot of people, into crisis. And you go, it's like, oh no, I have to change now. I don't want to
As,
change.
as we are talking about a sleep, I would like to ask you, what's your specific morning routine if you have?
Oh, my morning routine. Oh, good Lord. I'm privileged to have almost my own schedule when it comes to waking up. So I wake up when I wake up. And from there, while my mind is still asleep in a way, first of all, I avoid thinking about anything important. And part of that is the evening before, I've made a list of all the things I'm going to do in the morning. So if I start thinking about, oh my God, what do I need to do today? My mind immediately goes to, you've written that down. It's on the pad right there. So don't even think about that. And then I'll sit down on the floor and I'll start my breathing exercises. I'll start with my rapid exhale pulsations to wake my body up a bit. And then I'll slow it down until my mind is a little bit more relaxed. And since I'm still a little bit groggy, it's very easy to fall into a meditation / sleep. That's where it's important to maintain posture so that you don't end up just simply falling back to sleep. And I'll do that and alternate between different breathing techniques until I've recorded, I say 20 minutes of meditation. Do that twice a day. It will change your life. So after
I
the
do it
meditation, I
once.
stand up.
I do it once, 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes a day. Is there a difference if you do it twice
No,
every day?
no, not at all. You do it 20 minutes a day in the morning and you do that, it will change your life. Now, the idea is a lot of people have difficulty sleeping. And that's a case where if you are having difficulty sleeping, in addition to all the other things related to sleep hygiene, like turning off your computer 2 hours beforehand, making sure the lights are dimmer, perhaps some other routines or rituals that you have before going to sleep. You also can go through the breathing exercises and the meditation if you're having trouble going to sleep. And you know what? In fact, I'm going to be a little bit more truthful. I say I'll do that 20 minutes a day. Sometimes I do it twice. More often than not, I'll do one 20-minute meditation a day. And it's noticeable. I'm
Yeah.
just a more calm, happier person. And the only danger with that is that you might fall off the practice of doing it because you feel so great. You're like, I don't need to do that. I feel great. Well, you feel great because you're doing that.
Yep.
It's a good thing to have other folks willing to meditate with you. And now in these days of Zoom and other types of connections, it's good to have a Zoom friend that you can check in at a certain time saying, okay, 9 o'clock meditation, just have them on the computer and you just have the screen a little tiny bit, the video in a little corner, and you both meditate for 20 just to keep yourself, each person honest.
Awesome. And I would like to take this conversation to the conclusion. And before I ask you my last question, I would like to ask you, what's the legacy you want to leave on this world?
Oh, my legacy at this point, that's a big one. You know what? There's two different aspects to it. I guess one of them is I just want to leave a lot of people with sayings like that was good talking to or meeting Alexei, or as my students would call her, Alexei. And I have a box full of letters from students, and some of them still write letters saying, I've done this and I remember that class, or thank you for doing that. That was very valuable. So there's that one aspect that I know that I'm leaving at least a few more people that found value in talking to me than the ones that found no value and completely forgot. The other aspect is my own research. I'm right now have 2 book contracts to finish up right now. And I look at these books as a contribution to knowledge. I'm looking at some publications, some notes by archaeologists and travelers 100 years ago. And I'm thanking the heavens that they went through this place and wrote this down before such a monument was destroyed or so on. So I'm going to add to some of the research knowledge to this world. And maybe my contribution will be a few books in a library, which won't be bestsellers because they're academic, but somebody else will be able to look at it and go, it's like, I wonder what this site was like or what this research was like. And then they can draw value from that. So that will be my 2 contributions, I believe, to this world.
That is super awesome. And where can our listeners find you online?
Oh, well, I do have my webpage, dralexei.com, and I have some of my television shows, to some of my research, to some of the breathing related work that I do. So there's a little bit of information there. You can always type in my name, Alexei Vranich, online and find kind of good Google presence there. My last article went viral. So every once in a while, when I'm feeling low about myself, I'll Google my own name. I'm like, yeah, check this out. This is good.
I found so much information about you.
Yeah, no, this is great. So yeah, and every once in a while I have to remind myself, and my friends keep reminding me. It's like, Alexei, you do work and you're a nice person. People like you. And there's this, and you're like, yeah. So it's nice to be reminded a little bit because we all have our low moments.
Right. We definitely like you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexei. It has been an amazing conversation. I loved it thoroughly.
Fantastic. I'm ready for a good day. This is a nice way to start the day. I wish every day could start with a conversation about how to be happy.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, or you can visit https://nishantgarg.me NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this episode with your loved ones to help them live a fulfilled life. You are not alone in this journey. We all struggle in life. There is no shame in talking about it. I go through my highs and lows. I get depressed, and these practices help me in living a resilient life. You can also do this. You got this. Don't judge yourself. You are doing the best you can. And thank you so much again.